Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to Season 4, Episode 65 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout the 2025 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe, joined by Nick Cap. We are recording on Thursday, March 6th. Free agency has sort of started, so we don't really have a free agency show for you guys. We'll get that content out within the next 2-ish weeks or so, once a lot of news actually starts trickling out. We didn't want to do a ton of rumors because I personally, as a content watcher, I don't like going to NFL Network or ESPN and listening. This guy could sign this one. It's not, you're not helping me there. It's just speculation and just engagement, digging or whatever the word is, mining, whatever the word is. Anyway, so it's been a couple weeks since our last show. Our last show, we gave you a fantasy football time capsule, giving you one player from each position that we think will rise before draft day. So this episode, we're giving you each player from a position that we think will lower their ranking before draft day. And the reason why it's been a couple weeks is because my co-host here, Nick, had gotten married last week. It was a beautiful wedding. I'm not just saying that for the sake of the show. I told Nick that personally. So congratulations to Nick and his lovely bride. That was the focus for his life for the past few months, and especially within the past 2-ish weeks. So Nick is officially married. Now, the thing is, football's still the most important part of his life, I would think. So it's nice to know there's a new number 2 within his life. Oh,
of course. Well said. Married to the game.
So, like I said, fun show for you guys today. Me and Nick each have 4 players, one from each position, that we think will decrease in their rankings before next year's fantasy football drafts, or really this year's August, whatever you want to call it. So if you're a first-time viewer or listening to the show, thank you so much. You can find the show on YouTube, Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. Subscribe to that channel. Hit the bell icon. Drop a like on every single video that you watch. We're also available on all audio streaming platforms, iTunes, Spotify specifically. Give us a 5-star rating and a review. We're also on social media, Primetime FF Pod on Twitter, and Instagram is Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. So our fantasy football time capsule. And again, I know you might want some off-season content. You might want some free agency content. And if you do, let us know in the comments and we'll provide you kind of what you want. But we didn't want to come on the show and say, where's DK Metcalf going to go? Because it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter until he signs somewhere. I'm just using him as an example, but it just doesn't matter. So we're going to talk about the information that we know right now and give you guys a fantasy football time capsule. We each have a quarterback, a running back, a receiver, and a tight end that we think will not get drafted where they're currently slated to be drafted based on Fantasy Pros' current rankings. So Nick had first dibs on this. The backstory behind this is I asked Nick to do notes for our last 2 episodes the day before his bachelor party, which was a surprise. So Nick ended up doing all of those notes, so he got first dibs. The only player that we had the same on both of these lists were quarterbacks. I felt very, very strongly about both quarterbacks. Nick gets first dibs on both of the quarterbacks, so I did have to go with Plan B, but Nick, you could talk about Plan A. That was also my quarterback that I think will slip down his current ranking.
Sure, and let me start off by saying this. I'm not saying this player is bad. I'm not saying that I would not draft them in this spot. I mean, I kind of am, but I'm more so saying we're talking about ADP. ADP means average draft position, where people are drafting you, where the majority sees you, and things in this offseason are going to affect it. Offseason chatter, coaching changes, cuts, players that leave your roster, who are you signing, things like that. All of that is going to impact your ADP. And I don't think there's a bigger outlier right now at ADP at quarterback than Baker Mayfield, who currently is going off the board as the QB7. Some of the quarterbacks going right after him: Jared Goff, Jordan Love, Kyler Murray, and Justin Herbert. Now, it might feel like it is the right range right after the season. They did have a very good year. But I do think that we're going to see some critiques come in this offseason, and some things that are going to affect him. Some of the things we always see from guys like him: pocket quarterback. If you're a pocket quarterback, you do not get a lot of fantasy football love. The mobile guys are going to get more love, and some guys behind him Kyler Murray, Cam Ward, Sam Darnold, Dak Prescott, and maybe even Shador Sanders. One of those, you don't need to be a good quarterback, but if you're mobile, you're good enough for fantasy. Some other things we're going to hear. Mike Evans, only 1,000 yards last year, barely over 1,000. He missed a few games. We know Chris Godwin is a free agent as well, so we might see him walk this year. And on top of that, if they do re-sign him, he is going to miss the start of the year from injury. Their offensive coordinator went to Jacksonville to go be the big head coach over there. So these are all different things that are going to affect his ADP. I think he falls closer to the QB 10, which is not much of a skid, but I don't think he's going to be where he is drafted right now, which is a 6th round player. I cannot see anybody wanting to take Baker Mayfield that early in their draft.
So my argument for Baker is actually a tiny bit different, and I do have a different player, but I do want to state my case a little bit here.
Go for it.
A lot of my decisions on this list are basically an argument of I don't think this player will get taken at this ADP. Not really what I take him, but more so I just don't think it's going to happen. So right now his ADP is quarterback 6, right in front of Patrick Mahomes, quarterback 7. So there's my first argument. I think, and I would bet money on this, that in 75% of fantasy football drafts, Mahomes has drafted over Baker Mayfield. So just with that one take, I'm correct. But even if you put Mahomes aside, I think there's a couple other quarterbacks that people will consider. I think Jordan Love will get a lot of love, pun intended. Kyler Murray seems to always creep up draft boards every single year, and I kind of bought into it last year. I don't think I took him anywhere, but I did buy into it. I could see him getting drafted over him. And there's probably a couple other guys here that people will talk themselves into. Dak is very, very low at 19. I think people will attempt to talk themselves into Dak going much higher. Bo Nix. I just think there's people that they will talk themselves into over Baker. But the quarterback I've selected here, because for the sake of the show, we do not pick the same player, Jaden Daniels. And here's the thing. I really like Jaden Daniels, and I think he deserves the spot as to where he's being drafted right now at a quarterback 3. But again, for the sake of the argument, I don't think he's drafted as the 3rd quarterback in 75% or more of fantasy football drafts. He finished at the quarterback 5, which is great last year, a great rookie season. But do I see him being drafted over Jalen Hurts, Super Bowl winner, Joe Burrow, who was reliable for a lot of people last year and threw for, I think, almost 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns. Mahomes as well. And I'm off the Mahomes train every single year. This is the first year that I believe your ADP pre-draft ranking is actually correct about Mahomes. But people are still going to talk themselves into Mahomes based on the name. I think there are a lot of drafts where Mahomes will be drafted over Jaden Daniels. And again, I might sound ridiculous, but this is logic here. This is just logic. So aside from the logical part of it, Daniels will face a much tougher schedule than last year. He's going to be facing the NFC West, which is a pretty gauntlet defensive division, and the NFC North, another really, really tough division. And there's a chance of a sophomore slump. You see it with a lot of players. Now, would I predict this stuff? No. I would still feel comfortable taking Daniels over a lot of these quarterbacks. But if I'm looking at value, I still would rather have Joe Burrow in the 5th round over Jaden Daniels in the 3rd. I don't think the point differential will be worth it. And that's an argument that'll make closer to June or July. But I do think Daniels will outscore players like Hurts and Burrow. So that's my overall debate. But it's not a knock on Daniels. I had to choose somebody else. I said it on the last show that I think these quarterback rankings are pretty accurate. I actually think Dak's a bit of an outlier here. And I think Dak could get bumped up a couple spots, but everybody else is pretty obvious. I guess I should have put the quarterback rankings up on the show for YouTube, but I'll do that going forward. Running back. Who's your running back?
I'm going with Alvin Kamara. Right now, here are the running backs going right after him. Chuba Hubbard, Joe Mixon, James Conner, Ashton Genty, Isaiah Pacheco, and David Montgomery. I already mentioned that I think Genty's going to go way higher than him. I used my prediction in the previous time capsule prediction, but the take is pretty simple here. Alvin Kamara is an aging running back. In 2023, the Saints drafted Kendre Miller. Kamara's draft stock absolutely plummeted, even with the suspension. Going to 3 games, he was drafted at the RB22 in 2023. I think this is one of the more loaded running back classes from what I've heard. I've seen reports that there could be up to 15 running backs taken before we reach the end of the 3rd round. If that is the case, you have to imagine the Saints take a running back after cutting Jamal Williams. They have Kendre Miller, who's had back-to-back season injuries. Kamara, close to 30 years old right now. I'm not saying that I think he's going to be a bad running back or a bad draft pick, but I think right now at RB15, if you're telling me they're going to draft their running back and based off what we saw in 2023, I don't think he's going to be drafted in the top 20 running backs. I would not be surprised if he falls way down the board. After that, I think the guys that are going to jump him in no particular order, Genty, Connor, Monty, and a few guys further down the board, Tony Pollard and Tyrone Tracy. I think those guys will all see above Alvin Kamara by the time we get to our drafts.
I think you're wrong about a couple of those guys only because of name value. And it's like my Mahomes argument that name will garner somebody, one person in most leagues, to draft Kamara. And you know how this works in our specific league. Just throwing that one out there.
No, I don't necessarily disagree. I just think that you're going to see the 2017 running back class. Those teams are going to be taking running back this year, and all of them are going to have a minor skid. It might not be that far back, and it might balance out like your guys like Joe Mixon. Maybe the Texans take a running back too. So both of them fall back, so it's not that bad. I just don't think that Alvin Kamara is going to command the same attention that he has in years past. And I think we're going to see a sample of the 2023 happen again.
So I'm going to go with Chase Brown. When I had done these notes, he was being drafted as running back 12. He's now bumped up to running back 11. He's being drafted ahead of guys like Kyron Williams, James Cook, Kenneth Walker, and the other slew of guys that Nick had already mentioned. He finished at the running back 10 last year. And I told you guys when Zach Moss went down that Chase Brown was going to be a league winner. And he kind of was. Before Moss's injury, weeks 1 to 8, he was running back 28. After Moss's injury, he was running back 5. The draft class this year, however, is loaded with running backs. It's the best running back draft class, the deepest running back draft class, probably since the 2017 one. He was splitting time with Zach Moss before that injury, which tells me that they didn't have a ton of faith in Chase Brown and didn't look at him as a bell cow. Moss is now a free agent. I doubt the Bengals re-sign him. They're probably going to draft a running back in rounds 3 to 4. But what that also tells me is what they think of Chase Brown, and I don't think they think of him as a bell cow. So I'm looking at the guys behind him. Although James Cook isn't getting paid like one right now, he feels like the focal point of that Bills offense behind Josh Allen. That's a bell cow. Kenneth Walker, when he's on the field, he's a bell cow. Kyron Williams, again, when he's on the field, bell cow. Chuba Hubbard last year was a bell cow as well. Yep. Genty could be a bell cow. Joe Mixon, another bell cow. So I'm looking at all these bell cows. I think a guy like Chase Brown, who is not a household name, again, I'm looking at 75% of the leagues. If you've played fantasy football and you're just a casual player, you're not like me and Nick, you're a casual player, you know the name Kyron Williams, you know the name James Cook, you know the name Kenneth Walker, you know the name Alvin Kamara. You might not know the name Chase Brown. I think in 60% of leagues, Kamara is drafted ahead of Chase Brown in the majority of them, based off name alone and what have you done for me lately alone. And Kamara was very good last year. I'm not trying to use Kamara for the sake of Nick's take here, but Kamara was actually very, very good last year. So I think the fact that he was, and Mixon as well. Mixon and Kamara are names that were not only good last year, but have played for so many seasons that the casual fantasy football player that is joining a work league, joining a family league, just joining a $10 league for fun, knows these names well enough to be safe taking them over a guy like Chase Brown, who is going to be more of a boomer bust. And that's my take in March. On to the receivers.
I'm going with CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver 3. He was my prediction to be the wide receiver 1 this past season. Obviously suffered an injury. Season did not go as we expected, but still finished with a very solid year. And it's all about the sentiment around the player. That's what ADP has to do with it. It's what's the news, what's the buzz. And the public sentiment could not be worse around the Dallas Cowboys than it is right now. Brian Schottenheimer, new head coach, super run-heavy guy. Nick could tell you from his time in Seattle. And it's another team that we know might look to go running back early on in the draft. There's been a lot of reports that they have interest in Genty. If that happens, we know that that will be the focal point of the offense, but more importantly, the focal point of the news. Now you have Dak. He's missed at least 5 games in 3 of his last 5 years. There's injury concern at the quarterback. The new head coach that runs heavy, not a ton of Cowboys offensive threat. So we know CeeDee Lamb is consolidated targets, but this was the number one offense in football 2 years ago. Clear downgraded offensive coordinator, clear downgraded head coach. I think there's so much bad news and reports to him. Here are the wide receivers going after him. Nick has them right up on the screen for you. Puka, Amon-Ra, Nico Collins, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., and A.J. Brown. I don't think all of them are going to jump him in ADP, but I do not think he will be considered a tier 1 receiver by the time your drafts roll around. I think once Cooper Kupp gets out of the Rams, Puka will clearly jump him, and I think Amon-Ra has a very good shot to do so as well. But I do think when you're sitting there on draft day and you say, do I want CeeDee Lamb safe floor, or would you rather chase the high ceiling of Malik Neighbors if they get the new quarterback, Brian Thomas Jr., now that no Engram or Christian Kirk, as Nick and I just saw over the last 30 to 40 minutes, I do think that we're going to see some news breaking there, and I think you'll see guys like Brian Thomas get drafted ahead of him. Will that affect his ADP to go all the way down to 9? No. But do I think that he falls out of that top 4, maybe down to the 5 or 6? I absolutely think so. I don't see him staying as a top 3 receiver come draft time.
I don't think Kupp's leaving the Rams. I think that might be one of Stafford's return
contingencies.
Yeah, I'd be pretty shocked if he leaves the Rams. I mean, they're in Super Bowl win now mode. I could definitely see them getting Devontae Adams or somebody. So
yeah.
I have Nico Collins here, and I'm just looking at the top 10, 11. And again, the way that I have orchestrated these lists is based on what is the average fantasy player drafting. And I think, and I could be wrong on this, Nick, because I have no metrics to back it. I think over 50% of people playing fantasy football are casual players that are in a work or family league. I think the percentage of people that are like us that are consuming all this and taking risks, etc., is less than 30%, maybe probably 35%. So
it's definitely the minority.
Right. So I'm looking at the majority here, and I don't think the majority is taking Nico Collins as the 6th wide receiver off the board. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 6 over guys like Neighbors and Brian Thomas, who broke out last year. But then there's your household names. A.J. Brown, a household name. Tyreek Hill, a household name. Drake London, a household name. Well, maybe not Drake London, a household name. JSN, I don't have JSN on my list, but he's going to be a very, very interesting player to discuss over the next few months.
Yeah.
Terry McLaurin as well. And there's Mike Evans. And I think Mike is way too low. I can't believe that Mike is 17 down here. That's just that blows my mind. I think Mike's got to be higher than that. So going back to Nico Collins, though, he actually had a very good season last year. He finished as wide receiver 26 because he missed 5 games, but his average was 17.8. He had a top 10 average in the league. But he has C.J. Stroud, a quarterback, who was 15th in passing yards last year with 37,027 and 15th in passing touchdowns with 20. I don't see those numbers really getting an uptick for Stroud, which tells me that Nico Collins' numbers are going to be a little bit limited, especially in the touchdown department. They want to bring Diggs back, but it would have to be a team-friendly deal so Diggs could go somewhere else. Tank Dell's also out for the year. They just traded for Christian Kirk, only a 7th-round pick. I think they're also in the trade market for DK Metcalf or maybe a Devontae Adams or maybe even drafting a wide receiver. So Collins will be the number 1. He will get force-fed. He will get a lot of targets. But again, the argument is, how will the ADP shift and who do I think will shift down on draft day? I think a majority of fantasy football players are going to take A.J. Brown and Tyreek Hill over Nico Collins. I'm not saying it's smart. I'm not saying it's correct. My take with this entire list is, what do I think will happen?
Yep.
And I think a majority of players will take at least A.J. Brown and Tyreek Hill over Nico Collins based on name value. And then there's your shiny new toys and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. I think if we look at ADP on September 1st, I think Nico's going to be a lot closer to number 10 than number 5.
Interesting.
Lastly, tight end.
So this actually helps me out a little bit more with my argument because of some shifts in the ADP. I'm going with Jonnu Smith, who's currently ranked as the tight end 6. I had him as the tight end 7 a month and a half ago when I did these notes. And the tight ends right after him, you can see Mark Andrews, David Njoku, Travis Kelce, Evan Engram. We'll see what happens with him. Dalton Kincaid and a few other guys in there, but then Dallas Goedert. I put all those names because those are all the names that I do think jump him in ADP that by the time we get to the drafts. Plain and simple, name value. There is no way we're going to talk ourselves into taking Jonnu Smith as a 6th, 7th, or 8th round pick, which is currently where he is projected to be going. Nick talked about it a lot on the show. Name value. Mark Andrews, much more name value. Travis Kelce, obviously name value. Dallas Goedert, name value. Kincaid is getting that name value. Jonnu had a great year, a great back half of the year, especially with Tua. I do not think that he is going to have as much success this upcoming year. I think he's going to definitely be perceived as, at best, the 4th best option on the team with Tyreek, Waddle, and Devon Achane over there. Tua obviously has the health concerns, which it will factor into his ADP. He's going off the board at 6 as a tier 2 tight end. I do not think he's going to be drafted in the top 9. Maybe he slips to that 10 spot. I would not be shocked at all if he's drafted outside the top 10. I do not see any way we are drafting him in the 6th or 7th round, which again is where he is projected to be going.
I think TJ Hawkinson is one of the weirdest ADP projections by any position. And here's why. He finished as your tight end 10 last year from weeks to 9 to 17 after he came off the injury. And I know the injury is bad, so you can make the argument that maybe his season was a fluke. But when he played with Sam Darnold last year, he had under double-digit fantasy points in 5 of the 9 games that he did play from weeks 9 to 17. I bring up Sam Darnold because who's going to be the quarterback? It looks like it's going to be Darnold. It looks like Darnold's going to return. But who are the other quarterback options if it's not Darnold? I mean, Rodgers going there would actually be awesome for like storyline purposes, but I doubt it'll be Rodgers. It looks like Russ will stay with the Steelers. So that really leaves the Vikings with McCarthy, Darnold, or Fields, I think. I don't think there's really anybody else that's out there at the moment. Maybe Daniel Jones. I think they had Daniel Jones as their backup last year. I don't like any of those options for TJ Hawkinson, especially knowing he'll be the 3rd option between Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. They also love getting the ball to Aaron Jones out there. And then here's my biggest issue. Look at the quarterbacks behind, the tight ends behind him. There's George Kittle, who finished, I believe, was your tight end 2 last year. Then there's Sam Laporta, and I know he disappointed people last year, but he's still on a very, very productive offense. And I don't think he played bad last year. I just think there was too many mouths to feed, and he was just kind of playing his role in the offense. He just wasn't the 1st or 2nd read, still very good. Then there's Mark Andrews, who's arguably the 1st or 2nd read over in Baltimore. And again, name value alone, I think Travis Kelce. So I think all 4 of those tight ends, based on name value alone, will be drafted over TJ Hawkinson. Then if you want to do talent alone, I don't think Hawkinson's in a better situation or more talented than George Kittle or Laporta. Kittle's ADP has to get adjusted here. Deebo Samuel is now out of San Francisco. Ayuk wants out. Kittle was your tight end 2 last year. Like, I think Kittle has to be your tight end 2 going into the season right now. These tight end ADPs look wonky to me. And I think Hawkinson needs to get a large slip down the board. And Kittle needs to get bumped up to number 2. So, alrighty, guys. That is our show for this week. 4 fallers that we think will happen in the 2025 fantasy football draft. If you enjoyed the show and you're watching on YouTube, make sure to drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you have notifications when we drop a new video for you. If you're listening on an audio streaming platform like iTunes or Spotify, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and give us a 5-star rating and a review. Also, guys, feel free to ask us questions, whether that's on our YouTube, whether that's on Apple. I think you can submit questions or on our social media, PrimeTime FF Pod, Twitter, and then Instagram is PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast. Feel free to either ask us questions or give us ideas for the offseason content. We have ideas, but if there's something specifically that you would like to hear us talk about, I know people are going to say rookies. I promise you we'll talk about the rookies. I just don't want to do the rookie talk until closer to the NFL draft. I don't like doing a ton of speculation, and I know fantasy football is speculation, but I don't want to do a ton of speculation knowing the draft will come up. And if I tell you, Genti's going to be a great pick, and then he goes to a team that maybe isn't a great situation, and he's not a great pick. So we will definitely talk rookies closer to the end of April. But for now, if you have any other ideas and stuff you'd like for us to talk about, please feel free to let us know. So aside from that, we'll be back talking with you guys in a couple of weeks. We're going to wait until we get a slew of news from free agency. And by news, I mean solidified news, not just, rumors. And then we'll be able to break all that down for you and talk about what that'll mean for next season. So aside from that, be safe, have fun, and we'll talk to you guys very soon.